Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today we've got for you an interview I did yesterday with Patty Grantham. Just ran into Patty at a class here in Chico, and she agreed to come over and talk with us about her career on the Klamath as the Forest Supervisor for over a decade on the Klamath National Forest. So hope you enjoy this, and look forward to more of these types of interviews. We really appreciate when we can get people like Patty to come on and share their sense of history and stories about being uh, in the middle of these complicated land management relationships. So thanks for coming, Patty. Appreciate it. I want to thank our sponsors, QTech, makers of fine slip-in fire pumps and fire engines, WaterX, makers of the standard and wildland fire pumps, and Firebox, makers of really tricked out attachments for skid steers, made right here in Anderson, California. Hi, Patty Grantham.
Hi, Zeke Lunder. I feel like I told you earlier, I'm kind of a little starstruck.
All right.
It's amazing.
All right. Well, hey, welcome to Lookout. I'm here with Patty Grantham. Patty is a retired Forest Service supervisor from the Klamath National Forest. She also worked in the Washington office as the director of fire and aviation.
It was me for about a year. Mm-hmm.
And so Patty and I have been in a burn boss writing class for the last day and a half at Chico State. And I thought with all the stuff that's been going on and all the talk we've been having about the Klamath, it'd be great to have you come on and talk to us and hear your story about the Klamath and what you've seen happen there in your career and what's happening now. So welcome to the Lookout, Patty.
Oh, well, thank you. Like I said, I feel like I'm somebody.
So can you kind of give us a thumbnail of your career in forestry and fire?
Sure, you betcha. I was with the Forest Service for about 41 years. Started in southern Utah or southern Idaho while I was still in college. I'm a forestry graduate of the University of Washington, and had a little bit of a fire emphasis then. Was a militia firefighter in southern and in northern Idaho and in Montana and in Washington State, kind of as I moved around. I went to Alaska. I was a ranger in Alaska on the Tongass for a while. That took a little sidestep away from fire while I was up there, although the hardest thing I did was, in those big fire years in the lower 48 was to, put 20 of my folks on a jet going south, just because, they just didn't really have very much experience. Mm-hmm. But again, doing our part to help the overall effort. Mm-hmm. 2007 came down to the Klamath, was lucky enough to be the deputy forest supervisor. Did that for a year, and then was the supervisor between 2008 and 2020, and went into the Washington office for the last assignment of my career for about the last year, from July of 2020 to June of 21. That's kind of how I wrapped it up.
Right. So did you start your Forest Service career with timber?
So that's a great question. Very small. I started a very small district in southeast Idaho, and we did basically everything. And I ran into some forester. I was traveling, some experienced forester. I was on a plane sitting next to him or whatever, and he said, "Well, what kind of forester are you?" And I had no idea that there were different kinds of foresters because, we had 9 people in our office, and range and minerals, and then everything else was us. And so, timber planning, land management planning, worked in a big recreation program in Washington State, trails, campgrounds, recreation sites, ski area administration, all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, ended up as a ranger and doing a wide variety of things.
So on the Tongass, you were a district ranger?
I was a ranger at Petersburg on the Tongass. It was great.
Mm-hmm. So was that the 1980s?
I went to I went to be a ranger in 1992
Mm-hmm.
and then left in 2007. So I was there for 15 years.
Okay, so you were there kind of while the timber wars were unfolding in Northern California and Pacific Northwest.
I was, I was working, I worked on the Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest. They're out of Seattle and out of the Cedro-Woolley area from 85 until 92. And so very much, moving towards the, habitat conservation area premise, at that time, and a lot of the science around owls and just as I was leaving, I think it really, was the big uptick in changes.
And so that particular forest, was that a big timber forest?
It was a big timber forest back in the day. I think a couple of districts in particular, I think Darrington cut a whole lot of wood, and the Mount Baker district cut a whole lot of wood. And
Like in which decades?
60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Very much, yeah. I would say it was tapering off. 85 programs were definitely slowing down by that time.
And why was that they were slowing down then? Was that kind of a general part of the economy as well?
Well, I think that it was around, endangered species concerns.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was just really kind of the beginning of that transition.
So did that kind of the shutting down of forests in the Pacific Northwest, how did that affect the Tongass as far as the timber programs up there?
That's a terrific question. I don't think I've really ever considered that because, most of the wood that was being moved up on the Tongass, a lot of it was, going to Japan.
Okay.
And so it wasn't really necessarily backfilling, domestic markets kind of a thing. There's a special exemption for all that. We don't need to go into the history
Mm-hmm.
of kind of those long-term sale contracts up there. But the I wouldn't click those together.
I think I saw someone had written somewhere locally that like feller bunchers put more loggers out of work than the spotted owl ever did, and that was kind of happening when I was in high school. Was a lot of the mechanization was kind of taking over. I guess I'm curious how foresters thought it was going to turn out when they did kind of the sustained yield planning
Mm-hmm.
in the 80s and
Mm-hmm.
and such, with how these trees would survive fire. If fire, how come fire wasn't more on people's radar? So I was curious from your perspective, how we kind of missed the signals that fire was going to eat our lunch so heavily, 30 years later.
Well, and I can't really speak to exactly what those people were thinking because I've worked with a lot of just brilliant people on the Klamath, people who've forgotten more about fire than I'll ever know, kind of a thing. But I think the era of climate change, stepping on the gas pedal with respect to fuels accumulation, was just, it was that black swan. I mean, that's all I can say is that, who saw that coming, in the 70s and 80s kind of a thing. So, they're basing a lot of decisions on, on climate and fire behavior and fuels accumulation from the last, 30 years. And, yeah, we had some big fires and once a decade, some really big fires. And of course, back then, big fire, 50,000 acres kind of a thing, 60,000 acres, was kind of mammoth. But I just don't think anybody, it just wasn't, it was kind of unimaginable. What we, first, it's funny because, you mentioned 2008. 2008 was kind of my, being in the chair. That was my first big fire year. And, I remember Will Harling, I'm pretty sure it was in 2008. And, he was being an advocate for, using wildfire as a tool to help, clean up some areas and, reduce some fuels and that kind of stuff. And it was a pretty ugly year in terms of the weather and drying and temperature trends that we were in. And, and I can remember, saying it's just like, this is just, the conditions are just too tough, kind of a thing. And it'd be funny to see what he said, but I can remember him saying, and what if this is the best year that we're going to have?
Uh-huh.
And because, I, kind of pulled me up short in terms of, thinking about that. And that wasn't the best year that we were going to have, but it doesn't look like a bad year now,
Right.
kind of a thing. But so I just don't think, I think, a couple of things. I think the expectation around, being able to, thin these plantations and being able to, have the funding to be able to do that kind of work was perhaps a little overly optimistic.
Just because there was cash flow at that time.
There was, yeah, because big, big timber programs, was kind of, moving along. And so I think, a number of things have coincided to, put us where we are today.
So the collapse, would you say that the collapse of the timber industry then deprived the Forest Service of the cash flow to do all this work that it had thought it was going to be able to do as far as maintaining plantations? And
I think that I think certainly the cash flow from the timber industry, helped accomplish that work. But the other piece of it was that there was a fair amount of appropriated, funding that was, going into that too. And we kind of we saw that wind down, kind of along with the timber industry changes. I think the appetite for, funding those from our representatives in Congress, diminished. The champions of the timber program, we're seeing it diminish, and the appetite just wasn't there to continue to
keep giving the Forest Service money. Yeah. Like, hey, if you're not going to give us logs, why would we keep giving you money to do stuff?
I think I heard more than one of them say pretty much that.
So 2008 was kind of your jumping in, and
awesome.
In 2008, I remember, coming back to fires in the early teens, and that there was a huge emphasis on mapping firing operations. That you guys got a lot of heat after 2008 for tactical firing decisions and timing, and the resulting kind of. There were some papers, right, that talked about high severity results of the firing. Mm-hmm. And then you were really responsive to that, I think. It felt like so. Can you kind of describe like how that pressure from those operations kind of landed on your desk and kind of what you made of it at the time?
Yeah, so I think that firing operations, they've always been a tool, and I think that again, that 2008, the conditions that we were, fighting fire under. We're certainly at the more extreme side. So firing operations were giving us, outcomes that, were not desirable. That's for sure. Again, I think that they've always been a tool in the toolbox. I think that, and I could be wrong about this, but I think that 2008. Other things kind of were happening. So we were into the world of social media, right? And so there were a lot of different ways that people, could put their voices, into the mix in terms of their concerns. And so I think that was a big highlight. It was just like, some people were perhaps echoing the same concerns they'd had since 1977, and but there was just a greater audience, a bigger microphone, kind of a thing. So it's always been a tool. I just think that it just was brought into a broader discussion after 2008, and And I did. I asked teams to start, tracking where they were, using firing operations, as a suppression tool, for my education, and then also, to kind of get our facts right. If we're going to disagree about something, at least let's get our facts right about what we're disagreeing about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been interesting to watch that evolution. Being there, making those maps of where they were firing, and then looking at the imagery later. We were there quite a bit on the Butler complex and Salmon River fires in 2013. And then we were there for the Happy Camp complex and the Happy Camp complex, Grider Creek. Some of those areas really ripped. And I was just looking up the weather from that year because, as I've been kind of speaking out about letting fires burn in the wilderness, I want to have my facts straight too and make sure we're not at record ERCs. And it turns out we're not. The whole Klamath right now is below the kind of critical ERCs that we had last year at this time, say for the Shelley fire. So ERCs, we're talking about fuel moisture, relative flammability of the fuel. So how are some ways that you then were able to use fire for resource benefit on the Klamath during your tenure?
That's a hot topic, because there are people that leap immediately to, you're letting something burn, which is a red button label. People hitting the panic button, kind of a thing like that, and we still hear it, to this day, right. Kind of a thing. And my take was that when fires got big on the Klamath, there was a smart way to invest, those souls of firefighters that I'm asking to go out and do some pretty, ridiculously hard work, and there was a less smart way to do that. And I'd like to think that I was always interested in the smart way to do that. And so, natural features, taking advantage of, night operations, whatever else that we could do to, again, be more successful. I didn't, I really, it doesn't take you long on the Klamath to identify where the bad investment points are.
Right.
And so
right, and right out of the gate you had a fatality on the Panther fire, your first
live with
first
it.
year there.
Still live with it, yeah. So so just
were there fires that you said, lightning strikes and other fires that you said we're letting these burn for resource benefit, or you own them?
I think that during my time on the Klamath, I was associated with, this kind of horrifies me too, but probably about 1,000 fires during that time. And there were a handful that, that we identified as it's not worth investing anything in this for a whole variety of reasons, either for where it was burning, well, mostly for where it was burning, both from a, fuels and, likelihood of something getting big, and also for, if I had a firefighter get hurt in there, how was I going to get her out? And so, you just look at the risk benefit kind of a thing and just said, yeah, we're going to keep an eye on that one for a little while. And then there was also a couple of them on very high activity years where we had a lot of stuff going that were just flat out just low priorities. And so, I think that, if you want to call them resource benefit fires, that's fine. But they kind of self-select. Kind of.
Well, no, it seems like that's thing. Really where the rubber meets the road. Is we have fires that get to burn and do work that politically would be impossible when we're resource limited, when there's other higher priority fires elsewhere.
Yeah.
So how do you explain kind of the schizophrenic nature of, say, the messaging around beneficial fire and the operational practice of the Klamath and their neighbor to the west, the Six Rivers? In 2023, we saw the same lightning storm started fires on the Six Rivers and the Klamath. Six Rivers kind of right off the bat picked some that were doing good work and said, we're just going to keep an eye on these. Also, we're short on resources. And the Klamath was aggressively messaging the entire time. We're in full suppression. We're going to put out every fire as small as possible. And the Six Rivers actually got some pretty interesting outcomes with 35,000 acres of mainly beneficial fire. How do you has there always been a kind of major political difference between the Six Rivers and Klamath culturally?
Well, I would say a couple of things. Now, first off, I wasn't in the mix in 2023.
Right.
And so, I'm sitting on the sidelines eating popcorn like everybody else, right? I think that part of it's a reflection of our communities and kind of what they want to see happen with respect to these. And I'm not saying it's it's 100% pro fire on the Six River side and 100% anti fire kind of on the Klamath side, but the mixes are different. And I know that people talk a little bit about politics, and I never talk about politics with a capital P, because 41 years, 11 administrations, I think 6 Republican, 5 Democrat. I never really saw a great deal of difference in terms of kind of what we were pulling ahead with in the agency. But the politics with the small t, with the small p, that's for real. And we want to be able to have good relationships and achieve good things, and I think we all do what we can do from where we're at and what we've got to work with. So culturally, I worked lots with my partners on the Six Rivers and Unified Command and all kinds of different things, and I never had a big rub with them. Everybody needs to take advantage of what they can do.
Well, it's interesting from the outside to see the difference in messaging.
Yeah.
From the same agency.
Yeah.
And I think that what's frustrating to me is that I feel like when I see the difference between how things are happening on the Klamath versus the Six Rivers, I think, well, it's a national forest. It's not the Siskiyou County Forest. It's not the Humboldt County Forest. It's public land that belongs to the same people. How is it that we let local politics play such a role in how things roll out in the management of that particular landscape?
Yeah. Well, I think that the other thing, that's front of mind right now is, the Klamath has had some pretty awful things happen in the last couple of years, in terms of, losing homes, losing structures, lives being lost, and I think that's that certainly plays into it.
It's significant.
Yeah.
And
the experiences are a little different.
And that was what Rachel Smith said last year about, or in 2023. I think, though, in a lot of ways that, putting out every fire isn't necessarily making the community safer.
Absolutely.
And so
100%.
And so, like, pandering to the folks who are the most vocal and the most afraid, it may be the easy thing to do politically, but it's not the smart thing to do in terms of future fire resilience or moving the ball forward.
And at the same time, the fires that are getting big are selecting themselves, right? And so,
but helped along by all of our suppression that is accumulating the fuels.
Absolutely. And so, we aren't putting out every fire. am I being very two-faced when I'm saying that? We're not putting out every fire. Right now there's, how much fire? There's what, one large incident on the Klamath right now in Summit.
That wasn't put outable.
That wasn't it picked itself. I have no information about, the, suppression effort and everything else that was going on up there. But I know it's in the footprint of a 2014 fire. I expect that there's a lot of snags and a lot of brush and a lot of other things.
Fan. So did you move to DC for a while and then move back? Or?
That's a great question. And so I did that fire director job for about 11 months. from my breakfast nook in Wairika, California.
Was that COVID time?
Yes, the
Wow.
office was closed.
So what was going on then during the time of your tenure there? Was there conversation about managed fire? You know, I feel like this year in particular, there's just this like complete unwillingness to use the word resource benefit at all. And you know, I was talking to the PIO for the Shasta Trinity, and he said
Tom?
Tom Stokesbury
Yeah.
says we're absolutely not interested in managing fire as a resource benefit. It's full suppression. And it seems this year that there's even more kind of emphasis on that messaging than years past.
I'm not in the mix, so I don't really know what
You
the
don't
I
get
don't know what the
letters anymore?
I don't know what the marching orders, you know, kind of are right now. But you talk to leadership, you know, experienced leadership, and you know, they know that our solution is more fire, not less fire.
Yeah.
But you know, but gosh darn it, you know, it's these large fires that, you know, that pick themselves and that get established in July, that we know that we're going to be living with until the 1st of October, when that first, you know, that season slowing event shows up. Yeah. And it's hard to predict. I mean, it's everything. It's like, well, what's the weather going to be like the rest of the summer? I mean, right now it's kind of relatively calm in terms of fire activity, right? Yeah. I mean, in the big picture. I mean, what are we PL nationally 3 nationally? Are we
I don't
still?
know, but you know, we're not seeing new fires escape initial attack.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of resources to be had, you know, and you know, I bet you $1 that by you know, August 25th, there's not going to be a lot of resources to be had, and so that's
right when we go into our east wind season.
It's a hard sell.
It is, and I think one of the things I've come to in my career is just that we have a lot less control over any of this than we imagine.
Absolutely.
And so we throw ourselves into controlling the kind of controllable scenarios because we can. But then we're tired and then helpless when the big ones happen, like Slater or the Bear Fire or the Camp Fire.
Yeah, McKinney.
But that in the process, we kind of give people kind of maybe false hope that we are better at controlling things than we really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what do you think, you know, so much has happened since you started your career with Western and Klamath Restoration Partnership and MCWIC and the Kuduk tribe kind of finding a foothold in having to say how land is managed. Can you talk a little bit about being the kind of appointed colonial kind of figurehead in unceded native territory?
You know, I mentioned, you know, working in Alaska for a long time. I worked with a number of tribes up there, and you know, up there wasn't, you know, so much fire as it was, you know, the subsistence lifestyle, and a lot of tension around that, and you know, building relationships, trying to, you know, navigate, you know, those kinds of things. And so you know, I get the chance to come down to the Klamath, of course, and you know, our friends at the Klamath tribe are some of the most active, you know, voices, you know, nationally. And I was told that early on, and I thought, oh, well, this person must be kind of exaggerating, you know, who's telling me that. No, you know, that was 100% true, you know. Klamath tribe's very, very much engaged, very vocal, you know, tied in well in Washington, D.C., and you know, and is just very active on a lot of fronts. And it's been great, you know. Honestly, when I, you know, first showed up, I did not know what to make of these ideas.
I mean, a lot of good stuff happened during your tenure there. And can you talk a little bit about being part of that and maybe things you learned about your job from spending time trying to work with Native people?
You know, honestly, when I first showed up there, it was hard to wrap my head around a lot of the things that Karuk were pushing for, you know, in terms of land management in terms of fire practices. I think that there was early on, there were a few run-ins around some of the ceremonies that were happening, downriver, usually in the summertime. And, the tribal members, using fire as a part of that. And either communications not good with the Forest Service or with CAL FIRE or with, fill in the blanks. And so, things, there were some bumpy times, back then.
Like the Forest Service comes to put out the ceremonial fire.
Or the ceremonial fire gets away, or there were a number of things that probably if we'd been talking a little bit more, would have gone smoother. And so I like to think that by 2020, after a lot of fire seasons, a lot of hot summers, and that kind of thing, that things were improved, that we had a stronger relationship. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the tribe and for McWick in the work that they're doing downriver with respect to their fire program. I just got a kind of a wrap-up note from Eric Dara, with McWick, their fire director, and saying, okay, they're wrapping it up, for the summer burn season. But
in the beginning of July.
I know, and it was just, and they did great things. They're such a tremendous model, and and there's there's just a lot of mesh between the tribe and McWick with respect to fire, and I just think that they're just a tremendous positive example of what's going on with respect to burning in the North State.
So tell us about your new job.
So I retired in the middle of from the Forest Service in the middle of 21, and kind of was successfully retired for about a year and a half. I went back. I did a little bit of work for the Forest Service on the wildfire crisis strategy for about a year in 23, most of 23. And at the beginning of 2024, my good friend and just amazing all-round natural resources, guru kind of guy, Dan Blessing, came to me and asked me if I would be interested in joining him at the Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District to help coordinate the Siskiyou Prescribed Burn Association.
Okay.
And it, very intriguing question. The position had been vacant for a little while. It was really quite nascent. It had kind of got it started right about when COVID hit. And so that it sort of, went on the back burner. And anyway, so sounded pretty interesting. So in January of 24, I told Dan, I'll give you 6 months, and so now it's July of 25. I'm still there, and work part-time, but it's kind of if you believe that fire is part of the solution, kind of put your time where your mouth is, I suppose.
So what's your vision for prescribed fire say in that 1.2 million acres of the Klamath that are within the kind of ancestral territory where they're looking at the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership and burning? What's your vision for prescribed fire, and like what sort of scale do you see us needing to burn at?
Well, it needs to be markedly larger than where we're at right now. And the trick is, so are our landscapes prepared to accept that kind of that kind of fire? And I would say no, largely. And
why not?
Well, I think that for a variety of reasons, but we'll start with like one kind of glaring example, right now. So the McKenna Fire, 22, 23, trying to remember. 23.
Yeah.
The McKenna Fire in 23, 60,000 acres, and 90% of it high severity fire. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Fire effects kind of a thing. So the Klamath recently was successful in getting some restoration funding to do some work in there. And, there's a whole lot of people that want to, hitch their wagon to that star. But, I kind of voiced my opinion, and that was when fire comes back to that footprint, high severity fire always wants to get bigger. And so what are you going to do? Because that's like, it's on the back door of and into a lot of communities.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? And it's very expensive to go in there and, start putting in, fuel breaks that are actually going to work for us, that are big enough to work for us. Cleaning up, standing dead, eliminate fuels, start burning and that kind of stuff. But so it's a huge challenge because it's going to take a lot of resources to get the landscape ready to accept prescribed fire. And
See, I think a lot of us though think that McKenna, burned on one of the highest kind of hazard days in the last ever.
yeah,
Right? If you look at the
Yeah.
ERC charts for when the McKenna happened,
yeah,
it's like off the top of the scale.
yeah,
I think a lot of us think that you could have burned McKenna, that same piece of ground, in October, and had beneficial fire effects and thinned out a lot of the undergrowth and prevented something like the July version of McKenna from actually happening.
That's true. So okay, so two things. Number one, your comment about that, the terrible conditions that McKenna burned under, just harkened me back to Will Harling. Like, okay, so maybe this is going to be one of our better days.
Right. Like this is the hottest year in memory, but it's the coolest year for the rest of your life.
Exactly. So I mean, as much as
so I feel like we don't have time to wait. I feel like there's this this kind of dread and I feel like there's this kind of trope in forestry that we have to treat everything before we can prescribe burn it. And I think what I've learned from burning in the Klamath with Nickwick is that we can use fire as an initial entry, burning at night, burning under favorable conditions. And that if we wait until we've thinned everything, like fires like McKenna are going to burn it all to a crisp.
Well, I think that's a great, I think that's a great piece of feedback. Again, I don't think that, tell me I'm wrong, but I don't think that the example you just gave with respect to McWick is they're not burning at scale.
Right.
I 100% agree that's where we need to go.
But we've done, like with them in September, we've done hot burns as an initial entry at night. That burn with a pretty high severity, but improved the conditions of the stands that we were going into. And so I think that to me, that seems like one of the big challenges is that getting past this mindset that we have to bring a feller bencher or hand thin or pile and burn before we can put fire anywhere. And that we need to get more people out to see what you can actually do with fire as an initial entry. But that part of that is like surrendering the sense of control. It's like if you go in with a feller buncher, you have absolute control over which trees you take and which trees you leave.
Yeah.
And if you go in with fire, you don't have that control. And there's going to be messy things that happen when you put fire onto a landscape. But that the alternative to me is just that we end up kind of in this planning jail. And while we're suffering through NEPA and everything else, our forests are just dying.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at that at all. And I think that I've had some hope for some accelerated or some relief from certain aspects of planning or pre-project. Planning requirements, and I haven't really seen, that relief kind of show up yet. But there's still a lot of work that needs to go in, forward. The state, it's kind of interesting, because the state, just came out with some relief, by the governor in terms of suspending some of the state requirements. I mean, it'd be interesting to think, around the federal end of things.
Well, do you think that NEPA is really like, the NEPA becomes the scapegoat for the Forest Service's lack of capacity? But, I talked to Sue Husari a couple of years ago, and she said, if it was just NEPA, we would have figured it out by now. There's larger issues behind our lack of capacity, our lack of ability to work at scale. And what do you think of that comment?
I think that capacity, I think greater capacity, NEPA would be less of an issue. I think that's very true. I think that, if the Klamath had 100 archaeologists that, they could deploy to, complete surveys everywhere that we wanted to burn, that where surveys were required, I think, yeah, NEPA would be,
Do you think we would actually get the burning done at scale, or do you think there's other bigger factors at play? Social factors, political factors, funding factors?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say all of those things. I think that I think that burning something in October is very different than burning something in July around these parts. And if we can position ourselves to burn in October, I think that I think after the brief period that I've lived in the North State, I think that there would be some support. I think there'd be a lot of support for that.
For larger scale fall burns.
Yeah, just push it to a different time of year.
So recently there's talk, there's a new executive order on timber production, and it isn't really that significant. Like, it says up by 25% from zero, right? So it's not much of an increase. There's kind of the predictable reaction from some environmental community that, oh, this is going to be bad because the Forest Service can't do anything right. What would you, on a forest like the Klamath that's had kind of their timber program decimated, the mills have closed, the economics of timber in California have shifted kind of unrecognizably from what they were 30 years ago. If you were the forest supervisor on the Klamath tomorrow and got a directive to suddenly cut 400 million feet off your forest, what would you be prioritizing?
Well, the first thing is that, and I've been in the supervisor's office a few times, and there's just not a lot of people that are around anymore. Right. So it's it's just basic capacity kinds of stuff is a real challenge. I know that there's been outreach to different partners, kind of larger conservation organizations, partnering to be able to deliver projects, planning and everything. Yeah, exactly. Trying to, kind of find that way. But, you can't get blood out of a turnip. Yeah. And, even I can complain about, NEPA and some of the time and funding sinks that are affiliated with that. And yet we just can't get the work done from what I've seen of the workforce right now. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge.
Say you were the director today, if you were the director of the Forest Service today, or say you had the ear of Washington, D.C., do you think the Forest Service is reformable? Do you think the Forest Service should just become part of the Department of Interior and kind of completely get overhauled?
Boy, that's you're just tearing my heart out here, after,
after 40 years in there.
40 years of doing it, and so I started in the Forest Service in 1980, right? And I saw at least 2 different organizations during that 41 years, just things change,
It turned from a timber department to a fire department.
That's right. Society's values, how we use the land, everything, fire, climate change, all those kinds of things. So I don't expect the agency to be the same in 20 years from now. I don't know what that really looks like. Mm-hmm. Gifford Pinchot would, take my forester card away from me. You know, for me saying, going into interior, I don't know if it would be better. I don't, you know. Having sat in the Washington office, you know, I'll tell you a little dirty little secret, you know. So I think there's 4 or 5 land management agencies in Interior. Yeah, they don't get along that great,
Right.
you know. So, so I mean, are you really solving that by, you know, moving another agency kind of over, you know, kind of into the mix? So I don't know what the solution is. You know, there's people that are a lot smarter than me that hopefully are kind of pondering that. But I mean, you know, right now we're being overtaken by the fire problem. And, you know, and when I say problem, I'm not, you know, shirking, you know, humanity's complicitness in creating that, you know, creating that issue. It's not something that, oh my God, that just happened to us, you know, kind of a thing. You know, we brought this to ourselves. You know, until we figure that out, I think it's just going to get worse and worse. And that's a pretty horrible thing to say.
Well, I think it's interesting, you know, on the Klamath, maybe to ask, can it get worse? You know, or are we on the upswing? Have the fires of your tenure kind of, you know, I feel like the bottom for me of things is like the Dixie Fire wiping out 1 million acres,
Right.
Largely at high severity.
Right.
And now that landscape is a whole new management landscape.
Yeah.
And it, kind of by the time we figure out how to manage fire at the landscape scale, we're going to have a much different landscape to manage. And on the Klamath, I don't worry about a Dixie Fire because the puzzle that was built there by nature during your tenure really changed the whole conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to keep happening. We're going to have a Dixie Fire that burns in the Yuba, you know, or the McCollummy, and those fires are going to do the big picture work that we talk about with letting fires burn on the landscape, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, first, you're exactly right. You know, during my 13 years on the Klamath, I watched the jigsaw puzzle piece, you know, kind of fill in over time. And, you know, the majority, including the last couple of years, you know, the majority of the forest has burned. And so, okay, so we've got, you know,
and there's still trees there.
We've re-injected one interval, you know, kind of into things. And, you know, and we also know from fire science that it's, you know, we're probably 2 intervals away from really, you know,
Stability.
recovery, kind of a thing.
What do you think of the idea that that kind of, the surging of fire across this heavily logged and kind of altered landscape is kind of introducing kind of a natural heterogeneity back into this landscape that got fragmented in really unnatural ways?
Well, you know, I just hope that whatever past isn't prologue kind of a thing, because I look at McKinney and I look at, you know, 90% high severity fire. And, you know, that just is kind of mind boggling to anybody who kind of tracks fire, although it's not a big surprise. You know, I came to the Klamath in 2007 and, you know, a longtime fire ecologist, Clint Isbell, you know, was a great guy to rely on. Jay Perkins, you mentioned Jay, and I was like, okay, so, you know, what are we looking at for the proportion of high severity fire in our fires? And it's like, oh, you know, right around 10%, you know, maybe 5 to 12, maybe, you know, da. And then every fire season, I just watch that number get bigger and bigger and bigger. I think in 14, I think it was like upper 20s, you know, and so you're just kind of, you know, kind of seeing that move along. So I'd love to see these fires result in something other than a complete wipe of the landscape.
Right.
You know, and, you know, in McKinney, there's still 10%. So there's still whatever 5, 6, 7,000 acres out there that's you know, not high severity, and that's great. But I don't disagree with you with respect to the with the mosaic, you know, after. But I think it's going to take a little time. It is going to take. I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's hard for me to watch us work super hard to keep fire out of a watershed in a fire like Shelley, and then see a fire knocking on the back door the very next year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, we see that over and over. We fight like hell to keep this fire from spreading over the ridge. The next year, another fire takes out the next watershed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, well, if we would have let this fire burn and back into that watershed, it wouldn't have head fired out the other way.
Yeah.
But I've never had these pressures that you have of, having to weigh the death of firefighters or the loss of communities
and the resource availability and the crystal ball of like what are you really going to have? What are you going to have in 60 days?
Mm-hmm. So would you say you're an adrenaline junkie?
I think I'm in recovery. I think I'd like to think I'm in recovery. I think the PBA is going out on prescribed burns with the PBA is just my style now.
Yeah, we still get to talk on the radio, and
we still get to talk on the radio, and that's right, and dress in funny clothes, and walk around. My favorite thing is I throw on the propane rig, and go around and be a dragon.
Do you feel like you thrived in that kind of, like, I've got an incident command team here, I'm running this operation, I've got this, thousands of people working for me, we've got like a clear mission. Did you find that, you think, to be addictive? I
think it probably was a little, it was a little addictive for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sort of destroys your psyche, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just I think you go to too many funerals.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been to too many funerals.
Mm-hmm.
And so really the question, and I mentioned it earlier, the question was really, I'm asking people to come to the Klamath to help suppress this fire, engage this fire, and I better be sure that what I'm asking them to do is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And because I want to be able to tell families that
I feel like
was worth it.
Yeah, I feel like that point really gets lost in the kind of Facebook second guessing. I'm trying hard with the lookout not to be another one of these people who are just like, they should have done this, they should have done that.
Yeah.
They should have put it out small like they did when I was a fire chaser back in 1965.
Yeah, those guys are great.
Because of that personal cost, right? I had a friend who was on the. I have a friend who was kind of on the initial attack on this green fire, and I saw a lot of comments about they should have, put it out right away with the helicopters. And I think that, if you want to say that, you probably should go out and like walk the ground that you're talking about.
Yeah,
But I feel like in some ways I'm a hypocrite because I haven't walked the Summit Fire. I don't know what's going on up there.
Yeah.
But I'm holding judgment here.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I always say that the world is flat when you look at a map. Don't take that the wrong way, GIS guy.
Right.
But it's just like, oh, that's I would just go like up here, and it's like, let me go show you what that looks like.
Right. That's a clip.
Let's go tool up, and see how long you kind of make it out there. But it's just we've got a tough hand to to play. Been dealt a tough hand right now, and I get it. People like me made choices that put us in this right now. But I've got confidence in smart people moving us forward.
What would you say was something that you learned, like when you look at the younger version of yourself that showed up in a Klamath?
I was so stupid.
What did you what did you think was going to happen there in the next 10 years versus, like, what was your vision? What were you hoping you would be able to accomplish there?
That's another great question. I don't think I have enough self-confidence to really have had a vision or a goal for what I was going to accomplish. I think that I wanted to help steward a place that I hoped that I would grow to love, which I did, and grow to love it. And I hope I did some good stewardship thing. I think over time as a leader, you come to appreciate how you influence the next generation more. They what is it? Your they say the first part of your career is about success, and the second part is about legacy, kind of thing. Like, what are you leaving behind you? And I work with some just excellent people who are sort of, now are kind of in prime time, kind of in their careers, and are contributing, and that was a real, and that just might be, getting older. That just might be, I walked in when I was 47 and I walked out when I was 60, so that just might have been a bite of life right there. But it's amazing how life lands you places, you're supposed to be. And that's kind of how I felt about landing on the Klamath, and how lucky I was, and how lucky I still am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about the dam removals? You live in Wairika. You live in, it always tripped me out to get on Facebook and see all these people so upset about the dams coming out. And so, as a Siskiyou County resident, like, what have you been up to see the river where the dams have come out?
I haven't been up to see where they pulled the dams out. I've been along the river in different places. And I hope people don't view this as a cop out, I suppose, but I was always kind of agnostic about dam removal. I mean, I could see both sides of it. Mm-hmm. And
what's the side that's for keeping them?
Impacts on property values. I appreciate that. I do think that there were some contributions to firefighting in terms of water storage. Mm-hmm. But my sense is that the company was done with them, and pull ahead. So that was there's a business decision, and so I have friends that are huge advocates, that were huge advocates for dam removal, and it's been a spiritual journey for them, legitimate, and I have a great deal of respect for them, and I'm really happy that this has happened, that they've lived to see these kinds of things, and so I put a lot of stock in that. But change is hard. Mm-hmm. What do you think of dam removal?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm
Tear
so glad.
Tear them all out.
Yeah, well, not all of them, but those dams, like, I think as a geographer, what strikes me about that conversation is how much misinformation there was. That that they were water storage for agriculture, and like just that the basic geographic facts of the matter would be in question. Like, they weren't storage for agriculture. Like, and so
flood control
so I think the social media, like when social media intersects with land management, it amplifies all this stuff that isn't true. And that's what I love about maps, is that like maps, sure, you can lie with maps, but like the conditions on the ground are what they are. And like either like the dam feeds agriculture or it doesn't. Right. But so I'm not an advocate for tearing out every dam, but those dams, I think we've got better ways to make electricity now. And like you said, the company wanted to be out of it. And
what are you going to do about that? Okay, but they call the Klamath the upside down river, because it went from more development to, it goes from more development to less development, kind of in general. Most rivers kind of go the other way, right? So Mr. Geographer, so answer this. So we've taken the dams out, like what habitat awaits a restored salmon runs in the headwaters of all that?
Right. Well, yeah, it seems like they've only done half the job, right? That they really need to take out
where are they going?
Klamath Lake.
Well, where are they going?
Yeah. Well, if you took out that, I don't know that,
Yeah. So,
but they do know that the fish are spawning in tributaries that were under the lake, and that is important. Yeah. And I do know that those lakes were stank ass nasty water. Yeah, like flown over them on helicopters during fires, and they're just this putrid green, like warm stew. Like, that's not good. Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. So. Damn question.
I don't know. Land management is so complicated.
It is. Everything would be easy if people weren't around. So. Yeah. You're gonna have to cut that out. Don't have me say that.
Oh yeah.
Because people are gonna look, she's a
Jesus.
what is it, Agenda 21? What was it that we're going to get rid of all the people in this part of the country?
I feel like when I shoot my mouth off about letting fires burn in the Klamath, that it might come across that I don't care about people who live in Scott Valley, whether or not they're happy or healthy. I don't feel like we should have to let the wilderness get overrun with fuels and fire and not manage it because a few people want to live in their little version of paradise in the wilderness on the edge of civilization. Why should the entire country kind of suffer kind of degradation of our public lands so a few kind of privileged people can live in the woods out in the middle of nowhere who already hate the government?
But I mean, you bring up something really interesting. It's like one of the things that always horrified me, and I love wilderness, is the way that the wilderness boundary was drawn in Scott Valley. That was just, I always meant to like look back through the congressional record about like, how did we get here? How did we get to this thing where the wilderness boundary is the forest boundary, and then there's private industrial timberland immediately outside of it.
Right.
It's
It
like,
doesn't
who
make any
thought
sense.
that was a good idea?
Well, and it's this huge subsidy to private timber to keep putting out every fire to keep it from burning their land, which is in really terrible condition.
Oh, it's awful. It's just awful. I wanted to bring up issues. One of the fire issues that's yet to be solved in California is around private industrial timberlands, and by and large, those owners not wanting to have anything to do with fire. Even burning piles.
Right.
There's some places where there's lots and lots and lots of piles, and they need to get burned.
Yeah.
And we need to broadcast burn, and I think that that whole that whole idea is premised on, yeah, we can keep putting these, fires out and, protect these timberlands forever. And it's just like, I just don't know where that magical thinking is coming from.
Yeah, I don't either. I know that they're starting to take it more seriously, like SPI is investing heavily in fuel breaks and thinning, and they see fire eating their lunch. I think part of that question for me too is like a lot of this land right adjacent to the wilderness is in a carbon offset. And so they're incentivized to maintain a high stocking of carbon because they're getting paid for everything they can maintain that's in addition to what would naturally be there, right? And so we're incentivizing these people to grow a heavy fuel load and then protecting them from natural fire.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? Yeah.
And then so if we say we want to use fire to reduce the stocking on their land, we're cutting into their carbon paycheck.
Yeah, so I mean, you just identified one of the broken elements of the system, with respect to that.
So I was somewhere with Bill Tripp, and he was talking about how to pay for all this work, and he had LiDAR mapping of all the fir trees that are growing in like these tan oak stands and elsewhere. And he said, people really like fir trees for making 2x4s. Like, we could turn a lot of this stuff into a commercial product. And I think, the problem is just that the way the mills have moved and the gluts of salvage logs and everything have really just disrupted this traditional model we had of paying.
Yeah.
Things that would pay their way out of the woods can't, because there's a glut in the saw log market from mega fire salvage.
Yeah.
I just don't have a whole lot of hope that we're going to solve this problem with logging trucks and little machines. I can see that the industry can get a lot done, but it's hard to see anything working at the scale besides fire.
Yeah, I agree. So kind of try to invest in those places where you can get a product out, that that is going to make somebody a buck, right? And then, those things that are, deep in the heart of the backcountry. I mean, you've got other, you have road issues. You've got, you can kind of pile it all on. Just doing our best to try to, remove some material from the front country is really the best way to do it. And then really invest in the follow-on treatments too.
So in a kind of more nerdy topic that very few people will ever care about. After the Dixie Fire, there was this massive kind of salvage effort to remove hazard trees within 200 feet of all the major system roads. And I thought, why bother like keeping those roads at all when the future of this forest is, like I went back and looked at like a copy of the forest plan, and the scoping and public comments were from like 1978. So that, okay, we've got a forest plan that's almost 50 years old. 50 years ago, we had a mill in Susanville, we had a mill in Chester, we had a mill in Greenville, we had 3 mills in Bernie. This is such a completely...
Running 2 shifts, they were, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's such a, like, we have such a different management landscape, but we're locked into these visions of that landscape that are based on this past condition. It takes decades to do a new forest plan, doesn't it?
It's time immemorial, I believe.
Like, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think that, and yeah. I mean, when was the last, I'll show my ignorance, I don't know when the last new forest plan came out.
For any forest?
It might have been the Northwest Forest Plan, that amended everything back in 96.
And didn't they amend the forest plans for the Sierra Nevada forests?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. But it's like, it's this huge process, right? So like, is there any, like, do we need to be thinking about, like, do we need to be advocating for, like, completely revisioning the land management plans of all of these forests?
And I think that every time a new administration, arrives, I think that they show up with their new idea on, how to do that. And, unfortunately, even these, revised, these ideas on revised forest planning rules just can't move quickly enough. That even if, even 8 years, right? You've got somebody who's got 2 terms, and 8 years later, you're still not quite, out of the tunnel. So, I wish I had a great idea on exactly how to change the forest planning process. To be more adaptive, be focused on adaptation and simpler. I don't have any great ideas. Maybe that's the generation after the one that I just helped along here to show up and kind of do that. But you're right. There are a lot of things that are just buried in the 1970s, right? That are in the vision of the 1970s, and it's just like
that have impacts on how we. I think of all the effort that went into snagging those roads. That's all effort that's not going into thinning and burning in the surviving forest after Dixie.
Yeah.
We spend so much time chasing the cleanup that we're neglecting the future forest.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Although it's easier to snag those 200 feet than, because we can do that, right?
Oh, okay. So I interviewed some folks on Thanksgiving, land back conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed some scholars from UC Davis, and they said that it's pointless to give land back to tribes if you don't give fire back to them.
I would say that's true.
And so in this kind of land back conversation, what do you see as kind of concrete ways that the Native people can be more involved in determining what happens on the forests and what the priorities are?
I think that engaging, pardon me, I think that engaging in planning and collaborative processes and all that kind of thing. The reality is that it takes time, and and it takes energy. And I've seen the kind of have and have not tribes, and so the have tribes have been successful in finding a way to get staff and fund staff and keep and retain staff. That's a big thing. You don't want a lot of turnover. Ideally, you would be getting tribal folks into those, positions too. So maybe sometimes you're waiting for somebody to get through college or, fill in the blanks, right? And so I've seen, the engagement, for lack of a better term, with the have tribes, increasing and, being, effective and, and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other side, there's just a lot of tribes that just, don't have that ability. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what the solution there is. I don't know, but it's kind of like the old, showing up is half the battle, right?
Right, and it's easier to show up if you have a grant that's paying you to come to the meeting.
100%.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it seems like with WKRP, they've been able to keep some momentum through your departure and through Rachel Smith's tenure. Yeah. And what do you attribute that to? Is that just that they've had stable funding and a vision that has been compelling?
Yeah, I think that they've had people like Will Harling, who has just been a champion, forever of this, and has done everything he can. I think, early on, probably 90% of it was on his own time, right? He was just doing it because it was the right thing to do. So I think so. I think that they've built that momentum and they've got a lot of success. I don't know how many acres they, burn this spring and summer, but it's been a lot. They're terrific. They pointed out not too long ago, we were planning some burns in the Wairika area that, hey, we've got some resources that, we have that are grant funded and we can send them down your way, and I was like, oh my gosh, you make me want to cry. That's awesome. And so they've been able to, figure that out, to be able to thread that needle, between, federal funding and, state funding. And I think they've got some private, philanthropy, going down there. And I mean, it's life's reality, right? You have to kind of spend some money to make some money. They got the capacity and they're continuing going. And I just, look forward to seeing even more.
You too.
Great job, yeah.
Exciting to work up there.
Yeah.
Klamath is its own planet. I feel like I worked up there a bit, and then I just kind of had to stop going up there because it was too hard to leave there.
Oh.
It's just like you're down there and people are giving you, dried salmon and eel, and you feel like you're in a completely different reality.
You kind of are.
And then you come back here and you're like, what just happened? What am I? Too disorienting. I'm like, I'm just going to work here in Butte County. Let them have their projects, and it's not my place.
I'm going to be safe here.
Anything else you want to talk about?
I think I've taken up enough of your afternoon, but
I'm ready to, this
it's been fun.
Tires me out.
It's been fun. Yeah, it is, because you got to sit here and,
I got to go check my webcams and see if the green fire's burned up around Mountain yet.